Hey guys! Today, we're diving into the slow and sleepy world of Egyptian medieval dating, where every glance, letter, and walk by the Nile takes forever. If you're ready to relax, unwind, and let your mind drift through the quiet rhythms of history, this story is just for you. Sit back, get cozy, and let Sleeping Stone Whispers take you on this calm, timeless journey. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you never miss a moment of our relaxing tales. The morning sun rose lazily over the endless stretch of the Nile, casting long, golden reflections on the still waters. Small boats drifted slowly, their sails hardly moving, as fishermen untangled nets with deliberate care, one knot at a time. The distant call of a waterbird echoed softly, and the faint smell of mud and reeds hung in the air, neither sharp nor pleasant, but consistent, like a rhythm that repeated every day. Men and women of the village stirred from their homes, stepping carefully onto the soft sand, brushing off yesterday's dust. A young man preparing to meet his intended adjusted the folds of his linen tunic, straightening the fabric with meticulous patience, because the exact placement of each crease mattered greatly in polite company. He paused to watch a crocodile lazily slip beneath the surface of the water, its movement slow enough to be almost imperceptible, before he continued walking, thinking of nothing in particular. The morning was long, and so were the steps taken beside the Nile. Each ripple in the water seemed identical to the last, yet the young man considered them carefully, as one might consider a long-forgotten letter from a distant cousin. Time here was measured not by urgency, but by the deliberate unfolding of each action, a glance, a step, a breath, a thought that lingered just a moment longer than necessary. And so the day began, quietly, slowly, and without expectation. Before the first hint of sunlight touched the sands, the village awoke in its usual, quiet rhythm. The distant murmur of water from the Nile blended with the occasional creak of wooden doors opening and closing. Each household moved with slow, careful motions, attending to their small tasks as though the world itself had decided to pause just for them. In one small home, a young woman rose from her mat, her movements measured and gentle. She stretched her arms, feeling the stiffness from yesterday's chores, then walked slowly to the water jar, pouring a small amount into her hands. The water felt cool, almost unremarkable, and yet she lingered over it, washing her face in slow, deliberate strokes, noticing the way the droplets fell one by one back into the clay bowl. Nearby, a man arranged his tools for the day's work. Each knife and rod was placed with careful precision, so that he could find them easily later, though he would often forget the order and start again. He hummed softly to himself, a tune without beginning or end, as the first gray light of dawn crept across the horizon. Time was unhurried here, each movement mattered only for the sake of completion, not for urgency. Breakfast was a simple affair. Dates, bread, and a small cup of watered-down beer. Each bite was chewed slowly, deliberately, as conversation flowed gently, almost lazily, between neighbors passing through the street. Nothing was rushed, nothing was sudden. And so, before the sun fully appeared, the village existed in a quiet, almost invisible harmony, where the smallest rituals of daily life stretched into long, meditative moments, marking the beginning of yet another slow day by the Nile. The young man awoke after his brief nap on the straw mat, rubbing the sleep from his eyes as the sun climbed a little higher over the Nile. Today, like many days before it, was dedicated to courtship, a process both deliberate and slow. He rose carefully, placing each foot on the cool floor with intention, as if the speed of his steps might disturb the gentle rhythm of the world. He went to his small chest, opening it with a soft creak, and began selecting his garments. Linen tunics of varying shades of off-white and pale brown were folded and refolded, each crease scrutinized for neatness. He paused frequently, turning the fabric in his hands, listening to the faint rustle, noting the smell of dust and sun-bleached fibers. A strip of dyed cloth, carefully woven with a simple pattern, was chosen and rolled precisely around his waist, and then rolled again, and again, as if each repetition might make it look just a little more acceptable. Next, he approached the mirror, a small polished bronze disc, to examine his appearance. He ran his fingers slowly through his hair, combing it with careful strokes, adjusting every strand. He wiped a faint layer of dust from his face, noticing the subtle shadows beneath his eyes. Every movement was deliberate, every thought lingering longer than necessary. Finally, he picked up a small pouch containing a few coins and a simple gift, dried dates wrapped in a piece of linen. He examined the dates one by one, feeling their smooth surfaces and considering, silently, if the choice was adequate. Everything took time, nothing was hurried. The preparation itself was the ritual, and in the ritual, he found a quiet, repetitive comfort. And so, as the first warm rays of the sun touched the village streets, the young man stepped outside, ready to move slowly, deliberately, into the days-long, unhurried courtship. The young man made his way toward the village market, his steps slow and measured, stirring small clouds of fine, golden dust with each careful footfall. The sun had risen a little higher, casting pale streaks of light across the simple stalls lined in uneven rows. Merchants sat behind their wares, arranging them again and again, as though each adjustment brought them closer to perfection, even if no one would notice. He walked past baskets of dates, figs, and small loaves of coarse bread, picking up each item only to put it back, examining it in detail. The texture of the fruit, the slight imperfections in the crust, the faint aroma that rose from the baskets, all of it was noticed and catalogued, though he said nothing aloud. Around him, other villagers moved with equal deliberation, exchanging slow nods or brief words that lingered in the air like gentle echoes. The sound of carts creaking across the uneven stones and the low bleating of goats created a steady, unhurried rhythm, neither intrusive nor silent. The young man paused at a stall of linen, feeling the roughness of each thread between his fingers, rolling a length of cloth repeatedly before placing it carefully back where it belonged. Each action seemed to stretch time, making each moment last longer than it naturally would. As he continued walking, he noticed a child chasing a small bird, running just a few steps before stopping to watch it flutter away. The simplicity of the scene demanded no reaction, it was merely observed, appreciated slowly, and then left behind. And so the young man moved through the dusty market, each step, each glance, each breath taken with patience, as if the world itself had slowed down to match the measured pace of his courtship. After leaving the market, the young man walked slowly down the narrow lanes of the village, his eyes wandering from one mud brick house to another. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional shuffle of bare feet on sand and the soft creak of wooden doors opening and closing. He paused at nearly every doorway, merely to observe the small, repetitive motions of those living their daily lives. One neighbor swept the courtyard with careful, even strokes, moving the broom back and forth in a rhythm that seemed endless. Another woman poured water into clay jars, listening to the soft clink as droplets fell in sequence. A child carried a tiny basket of dates, stepping slowly to avoid spilling a single piece, and the young man watched as the effort seemed more important than the result. The scent of cooking bread wafted faintly from one house, mingling with the dry, dusty smell of the streets. The young man noted the way the smoke rose from the small clay oven, curling lazily into the morning sky. He considered the care with which each villager performed even the simplest tasks, from fetching water to mending worn garments. Nothing was hurried, nothing was abrupt, everything existed in a slow, measured cadence, as though speed itself was unwelcome. He lingered near a small garden, where a man knelt over rows of herbs, pulling weeds one by one. The young man counted the careful tugs, observing the slow patience required for each removal. For a moment, he imagined that this exact pace might be required for courtship as well, where every glance and every word must be precise, deliberate, and stretched across hours rather than minutes. And so he continued, walking slowly, observing, noting, and absorbing the quiet, monotonous rhythm of village life, a rhythm that seemed to echo in his own patient heart, preparing him for the long, unhurried day ahead. After wandering through the quiet streets, the young man arrived at a neighbor's courtyard, where a few villagers had gathered, speaking in soft, measured tones. Conversation here was not rushed, nor was it lively, it flowed slowly, deliberately, like the Nile itself. Every word was chosen carefully, and every pause was long enough to let the listener consider its meaning, even if the meaning was not urgent. He greeted a man with a nod and a small, polite, "Good morning," waiting patiently as the man returned the greeting with equal care. A woman adjusted her veil slightly before speaking, ensuring that her tone was measured and unobtrusive. The young man spoke of trivial matters, how the bread had risen that morning, the slight movement of a goat across a neighbor's yard, the faint change in the wind, but each comment was stretched into a slow, deliberate sentence, punctuated by quiet nods and thoughtful pauses. Even compliments were expressed with extreme caution. "Your linen appears clean this morning," he remarked softly, waiting a moment before continuing, as if the moment itself carried weight. The listener inclined her head, acknowledging the statement, but said nothing further, letting the silence settle comfortably between them. No one rushed, no one gestured too quickly. Each gesture, each word, each glance was measured, repeated, and stretched over several breaths. The young man considered the skill required for such slow, careful conversation. It was an art, as essential to courtship as choosing the right gift or adjusting the folds of one's linen. One could spend hours saying very little, yet each word mattered, each pause counted, and the patient repetition of these exchanges became a ritual in itself. And so, in the soft light of the morning, the villagers continued their polite, slow-spoken conversation, each word floating gently in the air like a small, deliberate ripple on the surface of the Nile. In a small, quiet room, the young man sat at a low wooden table, unfolding a fresh sheet of papyrus. Writing letters was a slow, deliberate process, requiring patience and attention to every curve of the hieroglyphs. Each symbol was traced carefully with a reed pen dipped into dark ink, the tip touching the surface with barely a whisper. Mistakes were corrected with painstaking care, as even a small blot could disrupt the intended flow of meaning. He paused often, considering which words to choose. "Good morning," he began, then crossed it out. "I hope this letter finds you well," he wrote slowly, letting the phrase linger before continuing. Each sentence was elongated, punctuated with pauses, as though the passage of time itself added importance to the mundane content. The ink dried slowly in the warm air, leaving a faint smell of reeds and soot, which he inhaled unconsciously while thinking of what to write next. The act of communication was deliberate and time-consuming. A single message might take hours to write, and days or weeks to reach its recipient, carried carefully across the village or along the banks of the Nile. Even the anticipation of a reply was prolonged, giving the young man ample time to think, revise, and rewrite, though often he did nothing more than stare at the papyrus, watching the ink settle into the fibers. When he finally finished, he folded the letter with careful precision, sealing it in a small piece of soft clay, pressed gently with his thumb. The gesture itself required patience, as the clay hardened slowly, preserving the message in a manner both permanent and deliberate. And so, through this slow and tedious ritual of writing and waiting, the young man participated in the ancient art of communication, where every letter, every pause, and every thought stretched across time with quiet, meditative care. The young man settled himself by the window of his small home, the warm morning light spilling lazily across the floor. In front of him, a simple clay cup held lukewarm herbal tea, its faint aroma barely rising into the air. Beside it, a small plate of dried dates waited patiently, each one placed with deliberate spacing, as if the arrangement itself required attention and reflection. He picked up a date slowly, turning it between his fingers, noticing the subtle wrinkles in its skin and the soft give beneath his thumb. The taste was sweet, yet muted, a gentle flavor that lingered just long enough to be noticed before fading. He sipped the tea with the same careful attention, noting the warmth on his lips and the subtle bitterness that followed, allowing each sensation to stretch and fill the quiet room. Outside the window, the village moved with measured slowness. A goat wandered past, chewing methodically, while a child traced lines in the sand with a stick, erasing them as slowly as they were drawn. The young man observed these minor motions without urgency, letting them mingle with the rhythm of his own quiet breakfast. Minutes passed in this unhurried manner. He reached for another date, chewing thoughtfully, and then another sip of tea, feeling the repetitive motion soothe him. The act of eating, drinking, and simply sitting by the window became a meditation in itself, a moment of calm stretched across time, where nothing changed too quickly, and the world remained gently predictable. And so, with tea and dates, the young man passed the morning, letting the stillness and slowness of life settle into his thoughts, preparing him for the deliberate, unhurried day of courtship that lay ahead. After finishing his tea and dates, the young man leaned back slightly, letting his gaze wander across the courtyard outside his window. The courtyard was modest, bordered by low mud brick walls and dotted with small clay pots holding herbs and flowers. Nothing stirred quickly, even the shadows seemed to move with hesitation, lengthening slowly as the sun continued its gradual ascent. He noticed a neighbor tending to a small patch of soil, turning it carefully with a wooden hoe. Each scoop of dirt was deliberate, slow, measured, as if the speed of the task might upset the careful balance of the earth. Nearby, a woman hung pieces of linen on a line, allowing the gentle morning breeze to move them in soft, languid waves. The young man observed without thought, letting each tiny motion fill the space of his attention. A small bird hopped along the edge of the courtyard wall, pausing at every inch of movement before continuing its slow journey. He watched the bird for several long minutes, noting the precision of its steps and the calm steadiness with which it pecked at the scattered grains. Each moment of observation felt significant, though nothing of note ever truly happened. And so, he spent the morning simply looking across the courtyard, witnessing the deliberate, unhurried movements of daily life. The simplicity of the scene, the quiet consistency of motion, and the endless repetition of small gestures seemed enough to occupy his mind completely, filling the air with the steady, sleep-inducing rhythm of life in the village. The day stretched onward, moving neither quickly nor slowly, but in a rhythm that seemed eternal. The young man spent the hours in quiet anticipation, waiting for the evening call, a customary moment in the courtship ritual. He moved through the day with deliberate slowness, attending to small tasks that required care but little energy, straightening the edges of his linen, arranging small stones along the courtyard path, and polishing the simple clay cup he had used for tea. Time passed without urgency. The sound of distant footsteps on the sandy streets, the faint chatter of neighbors, and the occasional cry of a child filled the background, none of it commanding attention, yet each note marking the slow march of the hours. He paused frequently, listening, as though each sound might signal the beginning of the awaited call, yet no one arrived, and the moments continued to unfold gently, predictably, without surprise. He sat by the window once more, glancing at the sky as it slowly shifted from bright morning to muted afternoon. The warmth of the sun on his skin was consistent and steady, neither too harsh nor too faint. In his hands, he held a small piece of dried linen, rolling it between his fingers with careful attention, feeling the texture as though it might hold the secret of the approaching evening. The evening call, when it would arrive, was expected to be slow as well. The steps of the visitor, the exchange of greetings, the careful conversation, all would be deliberate, drawn out, and measured. Until that moment, he remained in patient stillness, letting the quiet passage of the day envelop him, filling each second with repetition and gentle anticipation, preparing his mind for the long, unhurried rituals that were yet to come. In the village, choosing a match was a process measured not by days but by the slow unfolding of countless small decisions. The young man considered his options carefully, examining every detail of each potential match, from the folds of their linen to the steady rhythm of their steps. Nothing was hurried, every observation was repeated, noted, and stored away in the quiet recesses of his mind. He walked slowly past the homes of neighbors, glancing at the windows and courtyards, observing the interactions between families. He noted how one woman arranged her clay pots with meticulous care, while another brushed the sand around her doorstep repeatedly, straightening the lines as if they might signal her suitability as a match. Each small gesture mattered, though it seemed insignificant to anyone else. Time was the most important ingredient. Letters were sent, carefully folded and sealed in clay, then carried across the village or along the banks of the Nile, taking days to reach their destinations. Replies were awaited with patient expectation, and each new message sparked quiet reflection on every word and pause. Even a simple greeting could be analyzed for hours, dissected for meaning, and considered again the next morning. By midday, the young man had observed many minor details: the angle at which someone held their head, the precision of their hand movements, the manner in which they served water or carried baskets. Nothing was left unnoticed, yet nothing was rushed. The process itself became the point, a drawn-out ritual where the passage of time allowed for contemplation, repetition, and quiet, sleepy reflection on the art of selecting a companion. And so, the young man continued his slow, unhurried evaluation, allowing the day to pass, the sun to drift across the sky, and the minutes to stretch into hours, each moment echoing with the gentle monotony of ancient, careful courtship. In the late afternoon, the young man prepared to visit the family of his intended, a ritual conducted with deliberate slowness. He adjusted the folds of his linen tunic several times, smoothing each crease with careful attention, then picked up a small pouch containing dried dates as a customary gift. Each step toward the neighbor's home was measured, his feet moving slowly across the sandy street, stirring tiny clouds of dust that settled just as gradually as they had risen. Upon reaching the household, he paused at the doorway, taking a deep breath and listening to the quiet sounds within. A woman hummed softly as she arranged clay pots on a low shelf, and a child shuffled across the floor, carrying a small bundle of sticks. He greeted the family with the utmost politeness, bowing slowly, letting the gesture linger in the air before speaking his first words. Conversation within the house was deliberate. Questions about crops, weather, and daily routines were posed in slow, careful tones. Each response was considered, delivered without haste, and often repeated to ensure clarity. The young man observed the family's actions, the precise way a hand rested on a jar, the methodical approach to sweeping the floor, the gentle rocking of a child's cradle. Every motion was recorded silently in his mind, as though the rhythm of their day revealed more than their words could express. He presented the dried dates with meticulous care, placing them on a small cloth before offering them. The family accepted them slowly, examining each piece with polite attention. The act itself seemed to stretch time, transforming a simple exchange into a drawn-out ritual. When the visit concluded, the young man stepped back onto the street, pausing to straighten his tunic once more, and continued home at a pace that matched the quiet, unhurried tempo of the village. And so, the visit ended not with excitement, but with a sense of gentle continuity, a reminder that every moment, no matter how small or repetitive, was a part of the long, patient process of courtship in this slow-moving world. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the young man found himself strolling slowly past the fields that surrounded the village. The rows of crops stretched in neat lines, their green tips swaying gently in the light breeze. Each plant was tended with deliberate care, and he paused to notice the subtle differences between one stalk and the next, considering how they might indicate the season's success or failure. In the distance, another villager bent over a small plot of wheat, pulling weeds with careful, repeated motions. The young man exchanged quiet greetings, asking about the progress of the harvest. The conversation was slow and deliberate, each word chosen to convey politeness and attention to detail. "The wheat appears strong this season," he said softly, letting the phrase linger before continuing, "and the barley seems to grow evenly, though perhaps the southern rows need more water." The other villager nodded slowly, replying with equally measured words, commenting on the soil's moisture, the depth of recent furrows, and the gentle slope of the fields. Each observation, though mundane, was considered important, for it demonstrated patience, care, and attentiveness, qualities essential not only for farming but, by extension, for courtship. The young man continued walking along the rows, noting the rhythm of daily labor, the steady rise and fall of the hoe, the repetition of planting, the careful spacing of seeds. These small acts, repeated day after day, mirrored the slow, deliberate steps of choosing a match, where patience was paramount and no detail was too minor to consider. And so, time passed in quiet reflection, the sun moving steadily across the sky, the crops standing tall and unchanging, and the young man absorbing every slow, measured moment, preparing his mind for the even longer, drawn-out rituals that awaited him in the days ahead. In the village, even the smallest details of one's bearing were observed with careful attention. The young man understood that proper posture was not merely a habit, but a sign of discipline, patience, and respect, qualities valued highly in the slow-moving world of courtship. Each movement of the body was deliberate, every gesture measured, and the slightest slouch or hasty motion could be noted, remembered, and perhaps judged. He spent part of the afternoon standing before a low wall, practicing the way he held his shoulders, the alignment of his back, and the placement of his hands. He raised his chin slightly, then lowered it, observing the angle in the reflection of a polished bronze disc resting nearby. Each adjustment was made carefully, repeated several times, until the movements themselves became slow, deliberate rituals rather than mere corrections. Walking through the streets, he paid attention to the way he shifted his weight from foot to foot, ensuring that each step was steady and unhurried. When greeting neighbors, He bowed with precise control, holding the posture just long enough for it to feel meaningful, then straightening gradually, letting his limbs move with natural slowness. Even sitting required care, the placement of knees, the angle of the back, the gentle resting of hands in the lap, all were observed and repeated until they felt exactly right. Neighbors passing by noticed these subtle refinements, though they did not comment. Their own slow movements, measured and careful, mirrored the young man's efforts, creating a quiet harmony in the village streets. Every gesture, no matter how small, contributed to the long, patient dance of social interaction, a dance where speed was never welcome and stillness held its own quiet authority. And so, the young man spent the afternoon perfecting posture, letting each repetition settle into muscle memory, and feeling the steady, hypnotic rhythm of life move slowly through him, preparing him for the gentle, unhurried conversations and rituals yet to come. As the afternoon sun warmed the village, the young man decided to take a slow walk along the narrow canal that meandered past the homes. The water moved gently, almost imperceptibly, reflecting the pale light and the muted colors of the surrounding reeds. Each ripple in the canal seemed to unfold in its own deliberate time, neither hurried nor sudden, and the young man watched them carefully, noting the way they expanded, merged, and disappeared. He walked with measured steps, listening to the soft lapping of water against the canal's earthen banks. Occasionally, a small fish surfaced, causing a faint circle to spread across the water, and he paused, observing the subtle disturbance before continuing at the same unhurried pace. The reeds swayed lazily in the light breeze, and the soft rustle of leaves provided a steady, gentle rhythm, marking the passage of minutes that stretched slowly into hours. Along the canal, villagers performed minor tasks with quiet diligence. One man leaned over the edge, gently removing debris from the water with careful motions, while a woman poured water into a clay pot with slow, deliberate pours. Even the smallest actions took time, and the young man felt a strange satisfaction in noting the attention to detail, the patience required to perform such ordinary duties without hurry. He paused now and then to glance at his reflection, watching the slight tilt of his head, the deliberate positioning of his feet, and the calm steadiness of his hands. Every step, every movement, every breath was slow, measured, and deliberate, echoing the rhythm of life in the village and the slow pace of courtship that awaited him in the evening. And so, he continued walking along the canal, letting the gentle, hypnotic motions of water, wind, and labor fill his mind, preparing him for the long, unhurried conversations and careful gestures that were to come in the next days of slow, meticulous courtship. As the sun began to dip lower, casting soft shadows across the village, the young man engaged in a careful discussion about linen and clothing with a neighbor. In this slow-moving society, even such seemingly trivial matters were treated with great attention, for the selection, preparation, and presentation of clothing reflected patience, discipline, and social grace. They spoke softly, words drawn out and measured. "This linen appears finely woven," the young man observed, letting each syllable stretch into a small, deliberate pause. The neighbor nodded slowly, agreeing, and added, "Yes, the threads are tight, and the texture feels smooth. But the color is subtle, not too bright, not too dull." Their conversation meandered, circling around minor details, the way the folds fell when hung over a line, the subtle variations in dye, the proper alignment of hems. The young man took care to examine a piece of linen he carried, running his fingers slowly along its surface, noting the consistency of the weave and the faint scent of sun-warmed fibers. He described it in detail, pausing between sentences, as if each word might reveal a hidden quality in the cloth. The neighbor responded with equal deliberation, discussing how the fabric might be folded, stored, or presented, stretching every consideration across multiple long moments. Even minor adjustments were treated with gravity. A slight crease might be smoothed out repeatedly, a knot tied and untied with careful precision, each repetition emphasizing the slow, methodical nature of their daily lives. This attention to detail, they both knew, reflected their readiness for the careful, measured rituals of courtship and social interaction that defined their world. And so, the discussion of linen and clothing continued, slow and deliberate, each word and motion stretching time, filling the afternoon with quiet, hypnotic repetition, and preparing the young man for the equally slow and meticulous steps of the days to come. The young man spent the late afternoon walking slowly through the village, taking care to notice the patterns in everyone's daily chores. Each task, no matter how minor, followed a rhythm that repeated day after day, creating a predictable cadence that filled the village with quiet order. The movements were slow, deliberate, and unhurried, as if the repetition itself carried importance beyond the task at hand. He paused to watch a woman sweeping the courtyard, her broom moving in long, steady strokes. Back and forth, the dust stirred and settled with each pass, creating faint clouds that dissolved slowly in the warm air. He observed the patience in her movements, noting how her hand adjusted slightly at the end of each sweep, how her feet shifted carefully to maintain balance. Nearby, a man carried water from the canal, filling clay jars one by one. Each jar was lifted, held, and set down with precise care, as though rushing might spill a single drop. The young man noted the sequence of steps, the bend at the knees, the careful balancing of the weight, the steady placement on the ground, and allowed each motion to settle in his mind like a slow, repetitive meditation. Even the children contributed to this quiet rhythm, walking slowly as they carried small bundles of firewood, pausing often to adjust their loads or to rest. The young man found a strange comfort in the monotony, the careful repetition, and the predictable flow of life around him. Each chore, each movement, each small gesture seemed to echo the same principle: patience, attention, and the slow unfolding of time. And so, he continued observing, letting the patterns of daily chores fill his awareness, preparing his mind for the long, deliberate steps of courtship and social interaction that were to follow in the evenings and days ahead. As the day slowly moved toward evening, the young man joined his intended and her family for a simple meal. The food was modest: flatbread, small portions of lentils, and a few dried dates. Each item was handled with care, arranged deliberately on the clay plates, and consumed with slow, measured motions. There was no rush. The act of eating itself was extended across minutes, each bite chewed carefully, each swallow deliberate. Conversation was minimal, exchanged in soft, almost whispering tones. A comment on the warmth of the bread, a note on the texture of the lentils, a quiet remark about the quality of the water, each statement was deliberate, allowing ample pauses for consideration, reflection, and polite acknowledgement. Laughter was rare, restrained, and stretched across long seconds before fading into the gentle hum of quiet chewing. The young man noticed the subtle gestures around the table, the careful passing of dishes, the measured sip from a clay cup, the slight adjustment of a folded napkin. Every action was observed, recorded silently in his mind, for even the smallest detail of behavior could reveal patience, attentiveness, and readiness for the slow, methodical process of courtship. As the meal continued, the minutes seemed to lengthen, each motion and exchange echoing with the rhythm of repetition. Eating in silence became a shared ritual, a quiet meditation that filled the room with calm, and the young man felt the steady, hypnotic pull of time moving slowly, deliberately, and without urgency. And so, the meal ended with gentle, unhurried gestures, leaving the young man prepared for the continued rituals of evening conversation and observation, each step in the drawn-out process of courtship unfolding as gradually as the setting sun. After the shared meal, the young man walked slowly through the quiet village streets, noting the precise distance between each house. He counted his steps deliberately, letting the numbers stretch across his mind with the same gentle monotony that filled the day. 1, 2, 3, each step measured carefully, each footfall soft against the sandy ground, stirring only the faintest dust into the air. He paused frequently, observing small details along the way, the alignment of a doorstep, the slight tilt of a clay pot, the curve of a woven mat lying on the floor of a veranda. Each observation required attention, and each pause made the act of counting his steps feel both significant and endless. He restarted the count several times, correcting himself whenever a misstep occurred, allowing the repetition to fill the silence around him. Neighbors moved slowly in the distance, performing minor chores in the predictable rhythm of evening. A child carried a small jug of water, pausing halfway to adjust its weight. A woman adjusted her veil before entering her home. These motions were mirrored in the young man's own deliberate pace, creating a gentle harmony between his steps and the quiet flow of the village. Time stretched as he continued his slow procession, counting and recounting, observing and noting. The rhythm of footfall, the careful attention to detail, and the unhurried passage of the evening created a hypnotic cadence, preparing him for the long, patient interactions and minor rituals that awaited him in the continued process of courtship. And so, the young man walked, step by step, house by house, letting the gentle monotony of motion and observation carry him slowly toward the night, each step marking the passage of time with quiet, steady precision. As the evening approached, the young man prepared for the ritual of gift-giving, a slow and deliberate ceremony that formed a key part of courtship. From a small pouch, he carefully selected a single gift, a few dried dates wrapped in soft linen. He examined each date, noting its shape, texture, and subtle variations in color, before placing them gently on a small square of cloth. The folding and arranging of the cloth itself required measured care, repeated until it seemed just right. He walked to the intended's home with the gift held carefully before him. Each step was slow, deliberate, and mindful, allowing the rhythm of his heartbeat to synchronize with the gentle, hypnotic passage of the evening. Reaching the doorway, he paused, adjusting his tunic and straightening his posture before presenting the gift with a slow, formal bow. The family received the gift with equal attention, examining the dates and the wrapping with quiet deliberation. There was no rush, no sudden movement. Hands moved slowly as the cloth was unfolded and the dates inspected. Compliments were exchanged in measured tones, each phrase carefully articulated, stretched across long seconds, allowing the gift to be appreciated fully before it was accepted. Even the smallest gestures carried weight. A nod of the head, a slight smile, the soft folding of hands, all were observed with careful attention. The ritual itself became an extended meditation, where every motion, every pause, and every breath contributed to the slow unfolding of time. And so, the young man completed the ritual of gift-giving, the evening passing gently around him, each repeated action, each deliberate movement, reinforcing the quiet, hypnotic rhythm of life and courtship in the village. As twilight settled over the village, the young man wandered slowly toward the edge of the canal, where the water wheels turned with gentle, predictable rhythm. Each wheel lifted water carefully, releasing it back into the canal in a soft, continuous cascade. The sound was steady, repetitive, and unhurried, creating a slow, hypnotic pattern that filled the evening air. He sat on a low stone by the bank, letting the muted creak of the wheels and the splash of water dominate his senses. The sound rose and fell in a predictable rhythm, never abrupt, never startling. Each rotation was observed carefully, noting the slight shift of the wooden paddles, the gentle rise and fall of water as it spilled into the troughs below, and the soft ripples that spread outward with each drop. Villagers passed slowly along the banks, carrying small baskets or tending to minor tasks, all moving with deliberate caution. The young man observed them quietly, noting how their actions synchronized with the natural rhythm of the water wheels. Even the simplest gestures, the lifting of a foot, the shift of a hand, the careful balancing of a basket, echoed the hypnotic cadence of the slowly turning wheels. Minutes stretched into long, steady waves as he sat, listening and watching, feeling the gentle, repetitive motion of the water echo in his own heartbeat. The hypnotic sound of the water wheels became a meditation in itself, a quiet, unhurried reminder that time could move slowly, that every motion mattered, and that patience was the essence of life, and of courtship, in the village. And so, he remained there, absorbed in the gentle, continuous rhythm, letting the soft, repetitive sound lull him into calm, preparing his mind for the quiet, unhurried rituals of the evening that would follow. As the evening settled over the village, the young man and his intended engaged in the gentle exchange of compliments, a slow and careful ritual in the process of courtship. Each word was measured, deliberate, and stretched across long pauses, allowing the meaning to settle fully in the air between them. "Your linen is finely arranged," he said softly, letting each syllable linger before continuing. She inclined her head slowly, acknowledging the remark, then offered her own compliment in return, noting the patience evident in the arrangement of his tunic and the careful folding of the cloth around his pouch of dates. Each phrase was drawn out, repeated in thought, and considered for its appropriateness and subtlety. Even the smallest gestures carried weight, a slight nod, the soft placement of a hand on the table, the gentle shifting of a foot. Each motion was deliberate enough to signal attentiveness, respect, and a steady patience that defined their slow, measured world. The exchange continued, uninterrupted, as minutes stretched into long moments, each compliment appreciated fully, with no need to hurry. Time seemed to pause around them. The quiet evening, the soft glow of the fading sun, the faint hum of distant conversation, all combined with the careful words and measured gestures to create a hypnotic rhythm. The young man felt each compliment sink slowly into his awareness, leaving space for reflection, patience, and the continuation of the long, unhurried rituals of courtship. And so, the gentle exchange of compliments continued, soft and steady, creating a calm, lulling cadence that echoed through the evening, reinforcing the slow, deliberate pace of life, observation, and careful social ritual in the village. As twilight deepened, the village began its quiet preparations for the evening family gatherings, and the young man moved deliberately among the small rooms of his home, adjusting, folding, and arranging with slow, meticulous care. Each piece of linen was smoothed, each clay cup placed in precise order, and every small surface wiped with gentle, repeated motions. The process itself was as important as the gathering it preceded. Outside, the sounds of preparation drifted through the air, the careful sweeping of courtyards, the soft arrangement of mats on the ground, the gentle clink of clay pots being positioned for evening use. Villagers moved slowly, each step purposeful and measured, contributing to the steady rhythm of the settling night. No gesture was hurried, every adjustment took time, and each repetition reinforced the patient pace of life. The young man checked his own appearance, straightening his tunic and adjusting the folds of his cloth once more. Even minor details, the tilt of a shoulder, the angle of a wrist, the placement of his hands, were attended to with deliberate slowness. These small refinements, he knew, spoke volumes in a world where patience, care, and attention were marks of respect and readiness for social ritual. By the time the first family members arrived, everything was arranged to exacting standards. The young man greeted them with a slow bow, hands resting lightly in his lap, letting the quiet repetition of preparation and observation settle into the rhythm of the gathering. Each word, each gesture, each small motion was measured, creating a hypnotic, calming atmosphere that reflected the slow, deliberate pace of life and courtship in the village. And so, the evening preparations concluded not with haste or excitement, but with a sense of quiet satisfaction, a gentle lulling of time that set the tone for the long, unhurried conversations and careful rituals of the night ahead. As night settled over the village, the young man and his intended gathered near a small clay lamp, its flame flickering gently against the walls. The soft, warm glow illuminated their faces, casting long, slow-moving shadows. In this quiet setting, they began the slow, deliberate recitation of poetry, a cherished ritual that demanded patience, careful enunciation, and mindful attention to each word. He spoke first, his voice soft and steady, each syllable stretched to fill the silence, words describing the rising sun, the gentle sway of reeds, and the small, deliberate acts of daily life. She listened, nodding subtly, letting each phrase linger in the air, before repeating her own verses with equal slowness and care. The rhythm of speech became hypnotic, with long pauses between lines, allowing the meaning and the cadence to settle fully in the mind. Even the smallest movements, turning a page of papyrus, adjusting the position of hands on knees, or inhaling slowly between phrases, were deliberate, enhancing the sense of calm and the gentle rhythm of the evening. No one rushed, each gesture and each word extended the quiet meditation of time passing slowly. The flickering candlelight, the measured speech, and the soft shadows combined to create an atmosphere of tranquil repetition. Every recitation, every careful pause, and every reflective glance reinforced the gentle, hypnotic tempo of life and courtship in the village, drawing the young man deeper into patient observation, quiet thought, and subtle appreciation of the long, unhurried night. And so, they continued, speaking and listening, letting poetry unfold gradually like the slow drift of clouds across the evening sky, each moment lulling them into calm, deliberate stillness. After the evening rituals inside the home, the young man stepped outside, moving slowly across the soft sand toward the quiet outskirts of the village. The desert stretched endlessly before him, a vast expanse of gentle slopes and undisturbed dunes. The night sky unfolded overhead, dotted with countless stars, each shining steadily, without hurry, without change. He settled onto a small, flat rock, allowing his gaze to wander slowly from one constellation to another. The movement of his eyes was deliberate, taking in the patterns of light across the dark canvas. Each star twinkled softly, its brightness steady and gentle, echoing the calm, unhurried rhythm of life he had observed throughout the day. The faint sound of the wind stirred the sand, shifting it in long, slow waves across the dunes. Occasionally, a distant animal moved with quiet deliberation, but for the most part, the desert remained still, mirroring the young man's own measured pace. He allowed himself to simply watch, letting the vastness of the sky, the gentle coolness of the air, and the hypnotic stillness of the night fill his awareness. Minutes stretched into long, languid intervals as he observed, counting constellations and noting the slow movement of shadows cast by the moonlight. Time seemed suspended, the world around him reduced to the gentle sparkle of stars and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the desert. Each observation, each pause, reinforced the patience and quiet mindfulness that governed both life and courtship in the village. And so, he sat, watching the stars over the desert, letting the vast, silent beauty lull him into reflection and calm, preparing his mind for the continuation of slow, deliberate rituals in the nights and days yet to come. After spending time under the vast desert sky, the young man began his slow walk back through the quiet streets of the village. The sand beneath his feet was cool, soft, and undisturbed, muffling the sound of each careful step. Houses stood in shadow, their outlines softened by the dim moonlight, and only the occasional flicker of a lamp or the faint movement of a curtain broke the stillness. He moved deliberately, observing the small details of the night, the slight tilt of a doorway, the gentle sway of palm fronds in the breeze, and the faint glimmer of clay pots resting on the ledges. Each step was measured, each pause prolonged, as though the act of walking itself could be a meditative exercise. Neighbors, if they were awake, moved with equal care. A woman adjusted her veil before closing her door, a child tiptoed across a courtyard, and a man carried a small jug of water with steady, unhurried hands. The rhythm of their slow movements blended seamlessly with his own, creating a gentle cadence that filled the streets with quiet repetition and calm. He allowed his eyes to linger on familiar patterns, the alignment of doors, the curves of low walls, and the faint light reflecting off smooth surfaces. Every motion, every glance, every breath was drawn out, reinforcing the hypnotic pace of the evening and the patient, deliberate tempo of village life. And so, walking back through the quiet streets, the young man felt the steady, gentle pulse of time, each step a slow continuation of the day's long, unhurried rhythm, carrying him toward rest and the continuation of the careful rituals that defined his world. As the young man approached the doorway of his home, he paused to exchange farewells with those he had visited or observed throughout the day. The goodbyes were deliberate and careful, each word spoken softly, stretched across long, measured moments. No one hurried, each farewell was an event in itself, a gentle ritual marking the passage from one encounter to the next. He bowed slowly, hands resting lightly at his sides, letting the gesture linger in the cool evening air. "Good night," he said softly, the words elongated to allow their meaning to fully settle. The recipient of the farewell inclined their head in return, pausing to acknowledge him with equal patience, their own words drawn out gently in the rhythm of deliberate speech. Even the smallest movements carried significance, the straightening of a cloak, the careful placement of a foot, the quiet adjustment of a veil. Each action was observed, mirrored, and appreciated in the slow tempo that governed life in the village. The farewells themselves became a form of meditation, a quiet, unhurried exchange that reinforced respect, patience, and mindfulness. Minutes passed as the ritual continued, each goodbye unfolding like a gentle wave, leaving space for thought and reflection. The young man felt the calm rhythm of the evening settle into him, the gentle cadence of voices, gestures, and pauses echoing the slow, methodical pace of the day. And so, he finished each exchange without haste, carrying the quiet, measured tempo of farewell with him, letting the deliberate rhythm of each word and movement guide him toward the stillness of night and the continuation of life's slow, unhurried rituals. Back in the quiet of his room, the young man carefully unfolded a sheet of papyrus, the faint rustle of the fibers echoing softly in the still air. Before him lay a letter he had received earlier, its carefully written hieroglyphs requiring thoughtful attention. He read each line slowly, pausing between phrases to consider the meaning, the tone, and the proper response. With a reed pen dipped in dark ink, he began to write. Each hieroglyph was traced with deliberate care, the tip of the pen moving slowly, as if time itself had slowed to match his rhythm. Mistakes were rare, but when they occurred, he paused to correct them carefully, smoothing the ink or adding a small symbol to clarify. The process required patience, reflection, and repetition. He wrote slowly, letting each word linger in the air. Greetings were drawn out, "I hope this letter finds you well," followed by long, thoughtful pauses. He described the day's minor events, the careful arrangement of linen, the slow observation of neighbors, the deliberate steps taken along the streets, and allowed each detail to flow gently across the page. When the letter was complete, he folded it with care, sealing it with soft clay pressed slowly by his thumb. Even the act of sealing became a small ritual, deliberate and unhurried, marking the passage of thought and intention from one person to another. And so, the young man finished his response, letting the quiet, methodical rhythm of writing fill the room, the slow unfolding of time reinforcing the gentle, hypnotic pace of life and courtship in the village. The young man spent the next morning in quiet anticipation, sitting by the window and awaiting the return visit from the family he had recently engaged with. Time passed gently, the minutes stretching slowly as he observed the familiar patterns of the village unfolding outside. A goat wandered across a courtyard, a child traced lines in the sand, and a woman adjusted her clay pots, all movements slow, deliberate, and unhurried. He poured himself a small cup of tea, letting the warmth seep into his hands and the muted aroma rise in tiny spirals into the air. Sipping slowly, he considered the upcoming visit, imagining the deliberate greetings, the polite conversation, and the extended pauses that would accompany every exchange. Nothing was rushed, every gesture, every word, and every breath would unfold carefully, measured against the long, patient rhythm of the day. Minutes drifted lazily by as he adjusted the folds of his linen tunic, straightened the edges of the small cloth beneath his teacup, and rearranged the stones along the windowsill. Each small act served as both preparation and meditation, a quiet way to fill the waiting hours with gentle, repetitive motion. When the first sound of approaching footsteps reached his ears, he paused to observe, noting their measured pace, the soft shuffle of sand beneath their feet, and the careful positioning of hands and feet. The anticipation itself became part of the ritual, a slow, hypnotic rhythm, marking the steady, deliberate tempo of life, observation, and courtship in the village. And so, he waited, letting the gentle cadence of expectation fill the room, knowing that each slow, deliberate moment was a necessary step toward the continuation of quiet, unhurried rituals in the long, patient process of social interaction. As night fully settled over the village, the young man reclined on his mat, the soft glow of a single lamp casting faint shadows across the room. The day, filled with quiet observation, measured steps, and slow, deliberate rituals, unfolded once more in his mind. Each moment, every step along the streets, every careful word spoken, every gentle motion observed, was recalled with patient attention. He traced the patterns of the day slowly, the morning rituals before sunrise, the polite conversations with neighbors, the deliberate steps taken along sandy paths, the gift-giving, the shared meals, and the gentle recitations by candlelight. Even the soft twinkle of stars over the desert seemed to linger in his memory, each point of light as still and unhurried as the rhythm of life in the village. The young man allowed each memory to flow gradually, like a slow stream weaving through the sands of time. He considered how every detail, no matter how small, contributed to the steady cadence of the day. The patient, repetitive, and unhurried nature of these events created a quiet sense of completeness, a feeling that the slow passage of time itself was enough. He lay back, letting his body sink into the mat, feeling the gentle rise and fall of his breath. The soft shadows, the lingering warmth of the lamp, and the quiet thoughts of a day slowly lived filled him with calm. There was no rush, no urgency, only the gentle, hypnotic rhythm of life, carried to its conclusion in the peaceful, measured unfolding of time. And so, with the mind eased and the day's slow reflections settling like soft sand around him, the young man drifted into sleep, ready to greet another day of quiet observation, careful movement, and patient, unhurried life in the village.